Over the years, the fight game has produced wild stories of elite fighters going from the top of the world to the bottom of the heap because of their own choices.
Local MMA fighter wanted for a vicious attack on his ex-girlfriend is behind bars tonight.
Today, we're talking about the men who could have been household names in the long run, but ruined their own futures instead.
MMA fighter John Bones Jones has been arrested again for DWI and negligent use of a firearm.
Some got tangled up in crimes, others couldn't stay away from performance enhancers, and a few just couldn't control their tempers or impulses. Along the way, we'll revisit some classic fights. Look at the moments when a career could have stayed on track and remind ourselves how thin the line can be between main event glory and a lesson to remember. Let's get to it. John War Machine. Copenhaver's story is darker than any MMA bout. Long before his prison uniform, he was a tough grinder on The Ultimate Fighter who parlayed his brawling style into a couple of UFC paydays. Growing up in Simi Valley, he had a troubled childhood and often spoke about using fighting as an escape. On the reality show, he made an impression with raw aggression and a love for drama. He legally changed his name to War Machine in an attempt to create a persona, but even at his peak, he struggled to keep his impulses in check. After a disputed split decision win over Jared Rollins in 2007, he earned a Fight of the Night bonus and seemed poised to climb the welterweight ladder. A few months later, he was released by the promotion after getting into a bar brawl in Las Vegas that left multiple people injured. He bounced between Bellator and regional cards, frequently injured and often in the news for the wrong reasons. The fighting life wasn't enough for him. He courted attention with controversial social media posts, adult film cameos, and public feuds with other fighters. In the lead-up to his final acts, he admitted on podcasts that he struggled with depression and rage. In 2014, he made headlines for all the wrong reasons. According to trial testimony, he broke into his ex-girlfriend Christy Mack's Las Vegas home and assaulted her and another man. She later described being knocked out and suffering broken bones, missing teeth, and a ruptured liver while War Machine ranted about her infidelity. The state charged him with kidnapping, beating, and sexual assault. A jury found him guilty on 29 felony counts. At sentencing, he told the court he was a changed man and wished someone had killed him that night, but a judge still gave him 36 years to life.
War Machine was sentenced today to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 36 years.
Eligible for parole in his 70s, he will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. For a professional athlete, the window of prime earning years is short. Losing those years to a prison sentence eliminates any chance of a comeback. There's no witty aside here, just the blunt reality that a fighter's talent can't save him from the consequences of horrific choices. His once promising career became a footnote the moment he committed those crimes. James Krause has a different sort of self-inflicted downfall. The veteran lightweight and welterweight had a respectable run in the octagon as a consummate overachiever. He turned pro at 18 and bounced between smaller shows for years before finally earning a UFC call. Fans knew him as a cerebral fighter who relied on slick submissions and fight IQ rather than raw power, and his come-from-behind guillotine of Jamie Varner in 2014 is still a great fight. He embraced coaching while still competing, taking a hands-on role at a Kansas City gym that would become Glory MMA and Fitness. Under his guidance, previously unknown fighters like Megan Anderson and Grant Dawson found UFC success. When his athletic peak faded, he reinvented himself fully as a coach, cornering fighters every weekend and appearing on Dana White's Contender Series as a mentor. Then, he discovered another line of work: sports betting. A self-described numbers guy, he studied lines and outcomes the way he once studied fight tape. He didn't just place bets. He bragged on podcasts about running a Discord server called the 1% Club, where he sold picks and claimed he made more money betting than coaching. According to ESPN, Krause served as an agent for an offshore sportsbook and openly talked about collecting commissions on his fighters' wagers. He would post screenshots of parlay winnings on social media, drawing both envy and suspicion. Everything might have stayed low-key until November 2022, when his fighter Derek Minner entered a bout with with a concealed knee injury. In the days leading up to the fight, lines moved from near even to making his opponent a heavy favorite, and a flood of money poured in on a first-round finish. Minner threw a kick early, winced, and was finished seconds later. Regulators smelled something rotten. Multiple state gaming commissions suspended betting on UFC fights, and the Nevada Commission opened an investigation. Within days, the UFC issued a statement acknowledging suspicious betting patterns and suspending Krause indefinitely. They released Minner and announced that any fighter still training under Krause would be banned from future events. Sponsors dropped him. Podcasts he appeared on scrubbed his episodes. Krause went from up-and-coming strategist to persona non grata overnight. Unlike a doping case, there was no way back. The UFC's official statement read like a door slamming shut. For a man who once prided himself on being the smart guy in the room, his arrogance cost him his reputation, his gym, and a lucrative second career. The scandal also highlighted the murky intersection of legal sports betting and combat sports, where a single insider tip can shift odds dramatically. If there's an unsaid lesson, it's that bragging about beating the system tends to invite the system's full attention. Rousimar Palhares built his career around twisting people's legs. The hulking Brazilian grew up poor in the countryside and found salvation in jiu-jitsu. Even in a sport filled with joint wrenches, his heel hooks were feared. He carried his opponents like prey, often finishing within seconds of hitting the mat. The Brazilian jiu-jitsu ace won fights with lightning-fast heel hooks and knee bars, and fans loved the shock factor when opponents tapped in agony. His nickname Toquinho means little tree stump, a reference to his thick legs and short stature. The problem was that Palhares didn't always stop when referees told him to. In 2010, the Nevada Commission gave him a 90-day suspension after he held a heel hook on Tomas Drual too long. He claimed he didn't feel the tap, but video showed Drual screaming. When he returned, the UFC hoped he had learned his lesson. He scored quick wins over Dan Miller and Mike Macenzio with his signature submissions. 3 years later at UFC Fight Night 29, he locked Mike Pierce's leg and continued cranking after the referee intervened. Pierce's knee ligaments were damaged, and Palhares looked like a man possessed. In the post-fight interview, he tried to plead ignorance, but even his cornermen were waving him off. Dana White was not amused. Not only was Palhares denied his submission of the night bonus, but the promotion released him. Other fighters called him dangerous and petitioned for his expulsion. Palhares landed in the World Series of Fighting, won a welterweight title with another heel hook, and promptly repeated his bad habit. In a 2015 defense against Jake Shields, he applied a Kimura and held on after the tap while gouging Shields' eyes. The Nevada Commission suspended him for 2 years and fined him $40,000. WSOF cut ties. From that point forward, no major promotion wanted to risk the liability. Palhares' insistence on inflicting extra damage, whether out of malice, fear, or paranoia, made him undesired. Instead of being remembered as a submission savant, he became a lesson about sportsmanship. Every time he ignored a referee, he was effectively twisting his own career until it snapped. He now makes sporadic appearances in small grappling events and promotions, but the days of major paydays are long gone. In interviews, he has expressed frustration, arguing that fighters know what they sign up for and that the consequences of leg locks are part of the game. That attitude, as much as the fouls themselves, explains why promoters keep him at arm's length. Wanderlei Silva's fall from grace looked like something out of a soap opera. The Axe Murderer was one of the faces of Pride FC in the early 2000s, terrorizing opponents with stomps and looping hooks. He notched over a dozen wins in the Japanese promotion and went on a 20-fight unbeaten streak that made him a cult hero. His rivalry with Rampage Jackson produced some of the most violent highlights in MMA history, and his wars with Dan Henderson and Crow Cop helped define an era. When Pride was absorbed by the UFC, Wanderlei entered the octagon with huge expectations. He had some memorable moments. His brawl with Chuck Liddell was a fan dream, for example, but age and mileage were catching up. By the early 2010s, he was more legend than contender. In 2014, the UFC booked him in a grudge match against Chael Sonnen for that summer's pay-per-view. Chael had spent months taunting Brazilian fighters and insulting Wanderlei on TV. The matchup promised both action and trash talk. Just weeks Weeks before fight night, Nevada State Athletic Commission officials arrived at his gym to conduct a random drug test. Wanderlei didn't just refuse, he literally ran out the back door, later captured on security cameras. It wasn't the first time he was rumored to be flirting with banned substances. Fans had long whispered about how he transformed his physique during the Pride years. Later, he admitted he had been using diuretics to treat an injury and panicked when he saw the testers. The commission responded by imposing a lifetime ban and a $70,000 fine. A year later, a Nevada district court ruled that punishment too extreme, and a rehearing reduced the penalty to a 3-year suspension retroactive to May 2014. By the time he could return in 2017, the moment had passed. During the suspension, he repeatedly blasted the UFC, alleging that Dana White exploited fighters and claiming he was singled out unfairly. He recorded videos on social media calling for a fighters' union, then abruptly apologized when he reconciled with the promotion. He later asked for his release, signed with Rizin in Japan, and fought twice in Bellator, losing to Rampage and Chael Sonnen. The image of a legend sprinting out of a gym to avoid a urine test is an enduring punchline. Had he sat down, given the sample, and served a regular suspension for diuretics, he might have fought on, but his instinct to flee cost him his employer and the remainder of his prime years. Even his own admission that he took diuretics shows there was no grand conspiracy, just a panicked veteran whose pride pushed him into a terrible choice. Paul Daly's moment of madness lasted a second. The consequences lasted a career. The hard-hitting Brit was riding high in 2010. He had carved his reputation on the European circuit with devastating knockouts, flattening opponents in cage rage and cage warriors with left hooks that looked ripped from a highlight reel. When he signed with the UFC in late 2009, he made an immediate impact, starching Martin Kampmann in 1 round. His punching power had people wondering if he could be the man to threaten champion Georges St-Pierre. At UFC 113, he fought Josh Koscheck for a title eliminator. Koscheck smothered him for 3 rounds with wrestling and constant trash talk. Daly's frustration boiled over with several cage grabs and illegal knees. When the final bell sounded, instead of tapping gloves, Daly walked over and landed a cheap shot. The ref dragged him away, and Koscheck collapsed theatrically, milking the moment. In the post-fight press conference, Dana White called it one of the dirtiest things he had seen and announced that Daly would never fight in the UFC again. Dana emphasized that even if Daly was the best 170-pounder in the world, he wouldn't be allowed back. Daly apologized backstage and later issued a written statement blaming the heat of the moment, but the ban stuck. He tried to keep fighting in the US, but visa issues stemming from assault charges made travel difficult. He spent the next decade bouncing around Strikeforce, Bellator, Bama, and various regional circuits, scoring highlight reel knockouts for smaller audiences. In Strikeforce, he knocked out Scott Smith with a vicious left hook, only to lose to Nick Diaz for the welterweight belt in a wild round. In Bellator, he head-kicked Brennan Ward into oblivion and engaged in a back-and-forth slugfest with Paul Semtek's Page. Fans still remember him as the guy who threw away a promising career for a cheap shot. In a sport where fighters routinely exchange trash talk and heat, it took one post-fight punch to get him exiled. The irony is that Daly's profile might have been bigger than ever if he had waited 3 seconds to go back to his corner. Instead, he became a legend of what could have been, forever on the outside, looking in at the promotion that would have paid him the most. Chael Sonnen talked himself into, and then out of, more fights than most people have hot meals. The American gangster built his brand on trash talk and an uncanny ability to sell himself as a title challenger. His marketing genius turned a 23-11 journeyman record into multiple pay-per-view main events. He nearly dethroned Anderson Silva at UFC 117, dominating 4 rounds before being caught in a Hail Mary triangle choke. In the immediate aftermath, he failed a drug test for elevated testosterone. He explained that he had been on testosterone replacement therapy under a doctor's care and claimed he had disclosed it to the commission. He served a reduced suspension after testifying before the California Commission, but the stain lingered. He returned with a win over Brian Stann and was rewarded with a light heavyweight title shot against John Jones, despite back-to-back wins at middleweight. He lost and still parlayed the defeat into a high-profile coaching gig on The Ultimate Fighter against Jon Jones. Behind the mic, though, he was juggling performance-enhancing drug use that caught up with him in 2014. In June of that year, the Nevada Commission announced Chael had failed a random drug test for anastrozole and clomiphene, both anti-estrogen drugs normally used to counteract testosterone therapy. Chael admitted taking the substances as part of a fertility program so he could start a family. He told Sports Illustrated that his health and future children mattered more than his fighting career. The failed test pulled him from a scheduled fight with Vitor Belfort, and he promptly announced his retirement. Days later, he failed a second test for human growth hormone and EPO, prompting the Nevada Commission to suspend him for 2 years and fine him heavily. Chael's broadcast career also took a hit. UFC and Fox Sports terminated their deals. Away from the cage, he faced legal trouble for his role in a real estate scheme that led to a guilty plea for money laundering. Ever the hustler, he later resurfaced in Bellator, beating Wanderlei Silva in a long-delayed grudge match and losing to Fedor Emelianenko. But the 2-year layoff coincided with his physical decline. His run as a top contender had ended not with a loss, but with a compounding list of banned substances and legal headaches. The man who sold fight cards with his mouth couldn't talk his way out of a positive test. TJ Dillashaw represented the next generation of clean-cut champions until he didn't. The California native cut his teeth at Team Alpha Male, a camp known for producing lower-weight champions. A standout wrestler at Cal State Fullerton, he transitioned seamlessly into MMA and quickly rose through the ranks. His title win against Renan Barão in 2014 is still one of the greatest upsets in UFC history. Dillashaw, a huge underdog, danced circles around the Brazilian and finished him in the 5th round, ushering in a new era at bantamweight. He followed up by defeating Joe Soto on short notice and battering Barão again in a rematch. When he left his longtime team for Elevation Fight Team in Colorado in 2015, teammates like Urijah Faber and Cody Garbrandt accused him of betrayal and hinted that he might be cutting corners with supplements. Garbrandt famously claimed he had footage of Dillashaw using questionable practices at the gym, though nothing concrete ever surfaced. After winning back the title by defeating Garbrandt twice, Dillashaw dropped down to flyweight in early 2019 to attempt champ status against Henry Cejudo. He starved himself to make 125 pounds, looked depleted on the scale, and was stopped in under a minute. Weeks later, USADA informed him he had tested positive for EPO from a sample collected before the Cejudo fight. The synthetic hormone boosts red blood cell production and is considered one of the most egregious doping agents. Dillashaw immediately relinquished his bantamweight belt and accepted a 2-year suspension. He publicly admitted he took EPO to help with the weight cut and apologized, but the damage to his reputation was severe. Analysts began revisiting his previous performances with suspicion. 2 years in a sport can be a lifetime. He returned in 2021 and eked out a controversial decision over Corey Sandhagen despite tearing his ACL during the fight, then underwent surgery. When he challenged Aljamain Sterling in 2022, his surgically repaired shoulder popped out multiple times, leading to a TKO defeat. By late 2022, he needed more surgeries and hinted at retirement. The combination of doping shame, physical decline, lost prime years, and lingering bad blood with his former teammates ensures that "what if" will always hang over his career. Fans still debate whether his early dominance was pure brilliance or artificially enhanced, and his name now sits alongside others in the sport's doping hall of infamy. Jon Jones. Speaking of which, Jon Jones might be the most talented fighter ever to step into the octagon. He is also his own worst enemy. The upstate New York native captured the light heavyweight belt at 23 by destroying Mauricio Shogun Rua, becoming the youngest champion in UFC history. With creative striking, freakish reach, and killer instincts, he ran through a murderer's row of contenders, including Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans, Vitor Belfort, Alexander Gustafsson, and Daniel Cormier. For years, years, fans debated whether anyone could even touch him inside the cage. Outside it, a different story unfolded. He was arrested in 2012 for driving under the influence after crashing his Bentley into a utility pole. In 2014, he brawled with Daniel Cormier at a media day in the MGM Grand, turning a promotional stare-down into a messy wrestling match that earned them both fines. His long list of missteps reads like an endless rap sheet. In April 2015, the light heavyweight champion ran a red light in Albuquerque, crashed into a pregnant woman's car, and fled. Police said he left the scene on foot, returned to grab a stack of cash from his vehicle, and then took off again. The victim suffered a broken arm. The UFC stripped him of the title and suspended him indefinitely. While he avoided prison through a plea deal, the incident turned him from golden boy to disgraced champion. The following year, he was scheduled to headline UFC 200 against Daniel Cormier, only to fail an out-of-competition drug test for the estrogen blockers clomiphene and letrozole. An independent arbitration panel concluded his degree of fault was at the very top end of the scale and issued a one-year suspension. Jones argued the substances came from a sexual enhancement pill. The panel believed he was not intentionally cheating but called his actions reckless and said he lost an estimated $9 million. The ban retroactively ran from July 2016, so he returned in time to face Cormier at UFC 214 in July 2017. Jones knocked out Cormier and reclaimed the belt. Weeks later, USADA announced he had tested positive for the anabolic steroid turinabol. The bout result was overturned to a no contest, and the UFC stripped him again. After an appeal, USADA assessed a 15-month suspension retroactive to July 28, 2017, making him eligible to fight again on October 28, 2018. Sports Illustrated noted that the suspension stemmed from a doping violation at UFC 214 and that he tested positive for trace amounts of turinabol again before UFC 232, prompting the promotion to move the entire card from Vegas to LA. The agency deemed the latter test the residue of the original violation. The constant legal and doping woes meant Jones fought only 3 times between early 2015 and early 2019. In 2019, he was investigated for battery after a waitress in New Mexico accused him of inappropriate behavior. He entered a plea deal that kept the case off his record. In 2020, he was arrested for aggravated DWI and negligent use of a firearm after police found him in his car with a handgun and a half-empty bottle of tequila. In 2021, on the night he was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame for his 2013 fight with Gustafsson, he was arrested in Vegas for domestic battery involving his fiancée. Charges were later dropped. Through it all, he continued winning when he did compete, beating Anthony Smith and Dominic Reyes by decision. He has since returned to championship form, even winning the heavyweight belt in 2023. But his legacy is inseparable from his self-inflicted setbacks. Every time he's looked poised to become the undisputed greatest, he's sabotaged himself with reckless behavior, banned substances, or both. Fans often joke that Jon Jones's toughest opponent isn't DC, it's Jon Jones. He's the rare fighter whose personal biography could fill a season of reality television, and yet he still shows up on fight night and reminds everyone why he's special. That dichotomy will follow his name long after he retires. Did we forget any UFC fighters who ruined their careers? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section, and before you leave, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to MMA Rivals so you don't miss the next ones.